Hey everybody, Kit Merker here from Noble 9, and I'm talking to Dan Ciruli about Istio. Hey, say hi,
What's
Dan.
happening? How are you doing, Kit?
I'm doing great. Great to have you here. So I want to jump right into it. Can you just explain very simply for people what is the goal of Istio?
The goal of the Istio is to help you understand, control, and secure traffic between services.
Okay, and why would I want to do that?
So what's happened over the last few years is a lot of people have moved to a microservices-based architecture, and they don't even always call it that, but they've moved to ways of deploying their software such that they have different things that need to communicate. Most times, you hit a web app or you use a mobile app, you're connecting to something in a server room somewhere. Different things are running and they're communicating with each other. There's a lot of reasons people have done that. The trend to Kubernetes has made it even more prevalent, that an app is now a bunch of independent things. Those things are all communicating. And so in order to understand how your app is running, why it's running, if it's going slow, why it's running slowly, you actually need to understand that traffic. And of course, in certain industries, you really need to secure that traffic as well.
We were talking a little before about reliability, and could you explain maybe how Istio helps with on the reliability, like with the technical level? Like, how does it actually help create more reliable software for organizations?
The thing that we have noticed at Google, and this is, with some of these projects, we're trying to take the technologies, but most importantly, the concepts that we kind of realized succeeded internally and make them available externally. And we realized that there are certain SLIs, service level indicators, that it's important to monitor for every service. As our SRE team started monitoring literally thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of services, they realized they needed a standard way to do it. So we standardize on some metrics that we monitor, and those are our SLIs. They indicate the level of the service. We then use something called service level objectives. And for each of these different things that we're measuring, we say, okay, what's healthy? Where do we want that to be? And in time, we watch those SLOs for a service. And that lets us kind of assess the health of a service and understand what we need to do to make it reliable. We always want to push features. Investing in infrastructure is boring and expensive. However, if you're not meeting your service level objectives, it's a really strong sign to your team that you need to do some investment in the infrastructure to get that reliability up so that you can then ship new features reliably.
How does the translation from Istio to SLI to SLO, how does that work, and what are the limitations? Is that something that I sort of get kind of quote unquote for free, like you were talking about, by default it just works, or do I have to do something? How does that work?
You get it, quote unquote, for free. That's right. The way Istio works is that we have what we call a sidecar proxy, which you can think of as almost a shim that in Kubernetes gets deployed automatically with your workload. So you deploy something to Kubernetes, and this shim goes in along with it, and all the traffic into and out of your service goes through that shim. And then it doesn't really know anything about your workload, what you're doing back there, but every time it gets a request, it notices and it logs that, right? And it gathers certain telemetry. So for us, we think of certain indicators as the golden signals, the things you have to monitor. Those are traffic levels, the error rate, and then the latencies of your requests. So we monitor all of those metrics for every single call, and then we can report them to a downstream system of your choice. So everything that gets deployed, we can automatically start monitoring. Now we monitor those metrics for everything that is HTTP based. We can do other things with things that are TCP based, but with HTTP, we can actually, we know when a request starts and when it ends, and so we can say, here's the latency on that.
When you say HTTP, you mean HTTPS as well, I assume, yeah?
HTTP, HTTPS 1.1, or HTTP2, as well as gRPC, which is based on HTTP2. But yes, they're all HTTP based. That's right.
Got it. So in the metrics, if I understand correctly, so I update my podspec to have a sidecar container that gets deployed alongside my pods, a replication control, whatever. But I'm getting basically the sidecar, and then I'm going to get these golden signal metrics collected. But there still is a gap between the metrics and sort of the business logic, if you will, of like, should it be like how should it work 99.9% of the time, or some other factors? So how does that get played into the model?
That is, well, one slight correction is you actually don't even have to modify your pod spec. You can just label a namespace and say, hey, auto inject here, and then we use a webhook to automatically do that. So you don't even have to do that. Kubernetes makes that easy, and arrange the networking.
So that means, okay, so I have a Kubernetes cluster, I deploy Istio into that cluster, and then at that point, I just label the namespace. That's what you're saying?
You label the namespace, Istio injected, and it just does the rest. You can do it manually if you'd like. We have people do it both ways. So, but to answer your question, it's really an exercise left to the reader at that point. I don't know for your service if 99.9 is good or if it's bad. You might need, 99.99% of your requests to succeed. I don't know. And so what we do is we send the telemetry to systems of choice. Prometheus is a very common one. And then from there, people will build tools on top of it. Grafana, we have some very good Grafana dashboards where people like to visualize these things. Kiali adds the ability to not just see the metrics, but to see the connections between services. One thing that's true about these distributed applications is sometimes you have a very neat call tree. Sometimes you have more of a spaghetti mess. Along with those metrics that it gathers, Istio actually knows who is placing the call. So it can tell you this service is dependent on this service, or this service, this service, this service. And that can be very useful. Again, if something is going slow, if your whole app is going slow, it can help you determine where is that slowness actually creeping in? Which of my services is contributing to my latency?
When you're running production services inside of Google, SLOs are obviously the common methodology. But maybe you can share a little bit for people who don't know how you, meaning you Google, right, as a product manager, as development team, as SRE team collaborate together. How do SLOs and error budgets, maybe you can talk about error budgets and how that's used in the planning and execution inside of Google.
Well, we tend to work on these together, right? We use SLOs and an error budget as a tool to let us manage risk, essentially, and let us know how much time we need to invest in infrastructure, how much time we need to put into new features. And so we typically use error budgets, which we're monitoring an SLO over a long period of time, like a month or typically a quarter. We will actually monitor SLOs, error budgets over a quarter. And we'll say, your service needs to have say return no error, return under a certain latency 99.9% of the time over a quarter basis. And so then we monitor that. And if you run out of error budget during the quarter, you've hit more than what you agreed you would do, you don't get to ship new features for the rest of the quarter. And we literally do that. We literally say, hey, you're out of error budget, you're on feature freeze. You can still push new releases, but those releases, all they can do is invest in infrastructure, and so it really, in sense of the product team and the engineering team and the ops, the SRE team, to all be bought in on, okay, we're going to, when you're using it in a healthy way, you don't run out of error budget because you are continuously investing in the infrastructure. You're continuously making sure you're paying attention to quality. If you do run out of error budget, it lets you know you got out of whack. So we actually like to know ahead of time if we're trending toward running out of error budget. We'll slow down on features. We'll adjust a little bit, but that's really the way we use it. Now, separately, we often have very high-level SLOs at the edge, right? Because I'm talking about on individual services right now, and any given call, if you're calling a Gmail API or a Google Maps API, it might be hitting hundreds of services on the back end. We also like to have SLOs on that service as a whole, and those we talk about with our customers, and we set SLAs on a service level agreement, and we'll say, hey, customer, you're paying for this service. If this service as a whole isn't meeting its SLOs, then we agree to maybe cut your price for the month or whatever.
I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I've been talking to several people now about this topic, so I'm sure it's not a surprise, but it's kind of the elephant in the room right now with Istio. It's kind of the hot topic, which is related to the decision that you guys at Google made last week to donate Istio along with two other projects to a new foundation. And I want to just summarize the criticism that I've heard, and I want to get your take on it, okay? So the couple points of criticism I've heard. One is there's a fragmentation of foundations, and that there's a redundancy of purpose, that these foundations are serving the same purpose, but they're multiple. There's another criticism that it's not matching the expectations of certain partners that have been working on Istio. For example, there was a blog post from IBM. Jason McGee wrote about in detail. And there's also one thing I've noticed from conversations with people is they're questioning the motivation of it. Like, why is Google doing it this way? It's not clear what the true motivation is versus what's been said publicly. Okay, what I've found has been particularly confusing for people is one, the trademark management is already part of the CNCF, which was seen as one of the main public motivations that Google's used to justify it. Two is the question of why are these projects related? When you look at Istio, Garrett, and Angular, is there a relationship between those projects? And is there an implication here, perhaps, that the CNCF is not a neutral home for projects, and does Google say the other way? So I know I gave you a whole bunch of kind of points there, but I would love to hear your take on it, and I can reiterate if needed.
Okay, I do want to make it clear that people who work on individual projects like ours aren't actually the ones making decisions on this. So everything that goes on here is well over my head. I will say that yes, the CNCF does manage trademarks. In fact, lots of people think the CNCF, or they seem to imply that the CNCF is about governance, and CNCF doesn't govern projects that are donated to CNCF. Every project that is donated to CNCF does have to publish its governance. Which, by the way, we have done since the beginning. But CNCF doesn't govern how those projects are run. Each project is run according to itself and has its own, say, rules for what a steering committee is and how they're composed. You do also sign over the rights to the trademark. What the CNCF really does beyond administer that trademark, that is, they make sure that if someone is the CNCF would be the one to defend a trademark. If someone were using the term Kubernetes, if you named your company the Kubernetes company, it's a CNCF lawyer who would come say, you can't call your company the Kubernetes company, right? That's owned. They also take over marketing for the projects. And that's actually the biggest thing that they probably do. They're probably not in very many trademark disputes, but they do take over marketing. They provide infrastructure as well. Certain projects really need their kind of build and test infrastructure. But for Istio, we didn't feel like we needed all of those things, right? We have access to test infrastructure, we have access to build infrastructure. We haven't felt the need to do lots of marketing, and the CNCF is already home to a couple of service meshes. And again, this wasn't my decision, but I have a feeling part of the calculus was they're not going to market one over the other, right? Like it would be really weird if they were. And so it's not necessarily the best place to take over your marketing arm. If you choose to do that, then it's not really it. But what the two things I want to emphasize is that OUC is, first of all, OUC is a separate body. They now own the trademark.
OUC is the...
Oh, sorry. The Open Usage Commons is the entity that was created that doesn't do all those traditional things of a foundation. It just administers trademark, and it was created to be a place that can just do that. Say, we're not. You asked what the three projects have in common? Nothing, right? We're not doing any work amongst them. It's not like we're saying, hey, these work together. Rather, it's three projects that are doing fine on their own. We don't feel like need the marketing that some foundations do. Again, don't need to build infrastructure, et cetera. But we do want to ensure partners who are integrating and might use that name someday, that they can do so without fear that Google would someday decide to unfairly start adjudicating that trademark, right? That's the risk. If Google owns a trademark and someday decides, you know what, we used to let people call their product Google Kubernetes engine, or whatever. Like, you can use the term Kubernetes if you follow the rules. The risk would be if someday Google decided, oh, we're going to start being unfair about that. By assigning it to a separate entity, it's that entity's decision now how to enforce that. So we anticipate that the Istio steering committee will come up with a set of conformance tests. Said, here's the conformance test for Istio, and the OUC will say, okay, anybody who follows those conformance tests can use this, the set of rules, and the set of rules are already kind of written and clear.
So I think that all makes sense, and I appreciate you explaining that. What is your take on the IBM, the partner perspective? Why do you think that they have said that they don't see this meeting the community expectations for governance?
We early on there was a time where we were talking about, we did think that we would go down the CNCF route. We did think that, and we talked publicly about it. Hey, at some point we'll donate this to a foundation. I think CNCF was explicit or implicit. It was clear to everybody that was the game on the block. And so yeah, I really think that was it. Like they thought it would be, and the community thought it would be going to the CNCF. Now so I understand that. I do think that in the user community there's a big hullabaloo about this. When in reality, I think that it doesn't affect users at all, right? And in fact, I don't know of anyone who's even using Istio in a product name anyway. Even our commercial product doesn't have the word Istio in it, right? So it is really a very much a moot point. In terms of building a community, I think we're the only service mesh that is not a single company service mesh. We have, I think it's with developers from over 100 companies did contributions last year. We have, I'm trying to think of the numbers. If I were good at my job, I would have refreshed this going in. We have 3 companies represented on the steering committee. We have 4 companies represented on the technical oversight committee, and we have maintainers from, it's something like 12. It's around a dozen companies. So it is, I think we've done a really good job of building community. Ironically, the one thing we haven't done a good job is marketing that we do that, right? But we have 8 working groups, either weekly or bi-weekly. We have community meetings every other week. Our TOC meetings are open to the public. All those meetings are open to the public. So I think we've done a good job at creating that sense of community. We don't do a good job of getting into Twitter fights, but we try and stay out of Twitter fights, right? We try and stay silent. Not because we're trying to hide something, but because it's just not a productive conversation to have.
Well, thank you for sharing your take on it, and I hope that it doesn't inspire too many Twitter fights. I want to move back to the conversation about the technology. If we can, a couple more questions for you. Maybe you can share. Hopefully, you didn't run out of air budget this quarter. You can share some upcoming feature enhancements that you've got on the roadmap. What are some areas that Istio is investing in? What are you excited about? What's coming down the pike here? What's coming up next?
So I think the big thing that we're working on, we're doing lots of little things continue over time. The big thing that we're excited about and we're trying to invest in is moving beyond Kubernetes. I talked a lot about service-to-service traffic, and certainly almost anybody deploying into Kubernetes has that. But even people who aren't deploying into Kubernetes have that. It's very common these days. And when you have, communication between processes, you still have those same needs. You still need to route those calls correctly. You need to monitor them, and you probably need to secure them. So we're really trying to move beyond just Kubernetes to those workloads that are still running in VMs, and what we can do, want to provide that same feature set, but to really what is a much broader set of workloads that are out there.
So Dan, one question I have for you as we're kind of wrapping up here. So I've heard about this sort of general trade-off between infrastructure that's sort of easy to use or easy to get started, let's say, and industrial grade, right? And I've heard some thoughts on this about Linkerd versus Istio. Where do you think Istio falls on the spectrum today between that sort of easy on-ramp versus industrial, and what's the long-term plan there? Is it do both, and then how is that practical?
So we definitely did not follow the minimum viable product mantra as we released Istio. It was an intentional choice, and what we said was from the beginning, there are 3 main things. There's 3 main things that service mesh does. One is kind of networking and routing. One, we can come on later and talk about canaries. We'll do a whole episode on it. One is security, and one is monitoring. We said from the beginning, you don't want 3 products doing those. You really want, and the reason is that you want to be able to do things like use your monitoring tool to know, is this traffic MTLS or not, right? You want to be able to do a canary where you're routing calls in a certain way, but monitor that canary. We said from the very beginning, you don't want one tool to do one to do another, one to do a third, which was kind of the path people were on. And even other service meshes really said, hey, we're going to take one of those things and nail it. The advantage of doing it with MVP is you make a much lighter weight product. And the advantage of doing it our way is you kind of set a course. But we came out really complicated and lots of moving pieces and a complicated install and upgrade. Over the last 2 years, we've seen interesting things happen. The Istio install upgrade footprint has gotten smaller, has gotten much easier. We get, people will release a new release now, and it's great to see things on Twitter where people saying, "Hey, did that upgrade? It was easy. Thank you," because it didn't used to be that way. And we've seen the other service meshes realize like they have to add those features too. So I think that there was some really, really well-deserved criticism in the past of how difficult things were. We had a strategy. It was tough, and we've worked really hard to improve it.
If people want to get involved with Istio, what is the one place they should go?
So istio.io is the site. There is a community page there, and that leads quickly into the GitHub page, which has details, as I said, 8 different working groups. And they're not all super technical. I often tell people, if you want to get involved in open source, a really great way to do it is writing Markdown. Like one of them is the docs working group. You feel free to get started there, right? If you tried to use something and it was tough, go improve it. But we have, networking, we have security, we have a user experience working group. And so it's all there. Istio.io has all the links. We've got a Slack channel. We've got a discuss discourse website. So lots of ways to contact people who are working on it, lots of ways to find other users, and lots of ways to get involved.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate your time. Thanks. Have me back.
Thanks, everybody. This is Kip Merker here from Noble 9, signing off.